Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jennifer Chase, founding dean of the UC Berkeley College of Computing, Data Science, and Society, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the Dean's Distinguished Lecture on Shared Futures. The challenges we face today, whether in climate, health, or technology, cannot be addressed from a single perspective. This reflects the core of our college and indeed the core of Berkeley. Meaningful progress requires us to work across disciplines, to co-create, and to bring impact through collaboration. By bringing students, faculty, and leaders together, we can better reflect on how computing and data science can be developed in a way that benefits society. In that spirit, we are deeply honored to host Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland and former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, as today's speaker. This series is made possible by a generous gift from Alan Spivak. Alan's vision and generosity have allowed us to bring global voices to Berkeley each year to engage with the most urgent issues for our future. Alan connected with Omar Yaghi, a recipient of the 2025 Nobel Prize in Chemistry and a pioneer in materials chemistry, through a shared interest in the ideas that shape this series. Omar's work on water harvesting, carbon capture, and sustainable materials with direct impact on some of the challenges this series seeks to consider. It is especially fitting to have him with us today as a panelist following this lecture. We are also pleased to be joined by Erwin Chemerinsky, Dean of Berkeley Law School, whose scholarship has shaped national conversations on constitutional law and public policy. It is a privilege to introduce this year's speaker, President Mary Robinson. Mary's life and career have been defined by a deep and enduring commitment to justice. She served as the first woman president of Ireland and later as the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. She is a member of the Elders, a planetary guardian, and co-founder of Project Dandelion, a women-led global movement for climate justice. Across these roles, she has helped shape how the world understands human rights, and more recently, how we understand climate change as a matter of justice. Her work has been instrumental in placing equity, accountability, and most importantly, people at the center of the global climate conversation. Today, she brings that perspective to us in her lecture, From Justice to Climate Justice, a Human Rights Journey. Here she will reflect on the experiences that shaped her understanding of justice and how it has expanded in response to the climate crisis. It is an honor to have Mary with us. Please join me in welcoming President Mary Robinson.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for that warm introduction. And I'm delighted to return to Berkeley for this CDSS Dean's Distinguished Lecture on Shared Futures. And as you've seen, I've chosen the theme of From Justice to Climate Justice. And I hope indeed that my own journey, as I describe it, will inspire us towards more shared futures. I have very happy memories of prior visits to Berkeley, notably when I came, and it was Chancellor Lyons this morning who reminded me, it was in 1991 that I gave a lecture and then got the Berkeley Medal as President of Ireland, which was a a great honour. And I have been back in more informal ways since then, but I was also back in a teaching capacity in the Faculty of Law, because I was, after my time as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, I based myself in New York with a small organisation called Realising Rights, which was a kind of double meaning of realising. Everybody should realise that they have human rights, and those with power should realise those rights for people. And we were working in African countries on economic and social rights, and I'll actually come back to that. But I was teaching in SIPA as well, in Columbia University, and teaching international human rights. And for 2 of the years, I think it was probably 2007, 2008, or it might have been 2006 and 2007, we did it jointly with the Faculty of Law here in Berkeley. And the first year I taught in SIPA with virtual students tuning in from Berkeley. And the second year I came to Berkeley and taught here with my students in SIPA. And remember, this was way before COVID and everything. So this virtual teaching was pretty cool to me. I felt, you know, the technology was pretty impressive. Now let me turn to justice, which I have to say was important to me at a very young age. I mean, I grew up in the west of Ireland, the only girl wedged between 4 brothers, 2 older than me and 2 younger than me. So of course I had to be interested in human rights and gender equality and using my elbows. And actually, my parents were both medical doctors. We weren't a political family. And they instilled in me that strong sense. They kept telling me, you have the same opportunities as your brothers. But nothing in Irish society was telling me that. Even, we were a very Catholic family. My brothers were altar boys, up on church with the priest, very important in their altar boy clothes, and I had to wear a compulsory scarf in church, which I hated. You know, and I knew that Irish society wasn't promoting gender equality in any sense. I mean, women had to retire from their jobs if they were civil servants, if they married, and so on, and in so many different ways I was aware. So I decided, yeah, I'm going to actually work on justice and make it the way my parents rightly wanted to be, with full gender equality, etc. So when I studied law in Trinity, I very much studied it as an instrument for social change. I remember even talking about that. I kind of was very keen that law could actually make change in society. And then I was lucky enough to get a fellowship to the Harvard Law School to do my master's. I'm the class of 1968, which means that I was in Harvard in 1967 to 68, an incredible year. When I arrived, I found my American contemporaries were trying to resist the draft in some cases and certainly criticize what they regarded as an immoral war, the war in Vietnam. In April, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And actually, I remember watching on a small black and white television, 1968, the scenes of the burial of the funeral and burial of Martin Luther King, and we cried, we wept. We were very affected by that. And just after I graduated, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. And those two were very impactful at the time, because it was a time where there was kind of less violence, perhaps, than in our world today. But it wasn't that impacted really as much on me as my American contemporaries, my friends, because they weren't going into Wall Street firms when they graduated. They were going into the civil rights movement or poverty programs in the south of this country. They were very idealistic. And I was very affected by the fact that they were doing this as leaders, young people leading. This was so different from the Ireland that I had come from. In Ireland, you waited your turn, and you waited into your 30s and maybe into your 40s. And if you were a woman, you didn't have much turn anyway to wait for. It was just a very different thing. So I came back to Dublin and started to practice law in 1968. And in 1969, there was an election to our 2 houses of Parliament to form a new government. And the Senate in Ireland has 60 members, and 6 of them are from university seats. And I was imbued with what my husband-to-be, who had a good sense of humour, called my Harvard humility. He obviously meant the opposite. And I questioned why it was elderly male professors who managed to get these seats elected by the graduates of their university. And I said, that's not fair. So they said, look, why don't you stand and we'll all try. And anyway, we had a great campaign. And at the age of 25, I found myself elected to the Senate. And it was a great privilege, because in the same year, I also got a professorship, which wasn't a real professorship. It was a trust created with the title of Reed Professor and the salary of a part-time junior lecturer. If you can imagine that, It was meant for a practicing lawyer, which I was. So within that year of 1969, by the end of that year, I was able to teach law, practice law, and make law, if you like, contribute to the making of law. And this is what I was doing for the best part of 20 years. Also, of course, got married in December 1970, and we had 3 children, and I'm glad to say we've been lucky enough to have 7 grandchildren who influence me enormously now. But the justice that I was interested in was changing what was happening in Ireland, helping Ireland to open up and, if you like, not be dominated by the teachings of the Catholic Church. And the issue that I started on was legalizing family planning. It made a lot of sense to me, because I was aware that married women in Ireland couldn't get the contraceptive pill unless they had the written permission of their doctor, that they had cycle regulation problems. And it must have been the Irish weather, because an awful lot of women had cycle regulation problems. And it was against the criminal law to buy or sell a condom. So obviously there needed to be a change. But what I hadn't anticipated, I went from being thought of, because there was quite a lot of publicity when at the age of 25 I got elected to the Senate, and I was kind of regarded as being quite kind of unusual for a young woman. And suddenly I was a hate figure. I had touched a nerve. I was talking about sex. I was talking about relationships, family planning, utterly against the whole psychology in Ireland of the time, and very deeply resented, very deeply. I got hate letters. I mean, there was no social media in those days, and those letters were very painful. I was called a witch from hell. I was told I was the last snake that St. Patrick hadn't got rid of. And some of it was funny and some of it wasn't so funny. And actually, it destabilized me. In particular, when the Catholic Archbishop at the time, Archbishop McQuaid, required a letter to be read out in every parish in Dublin, saying that my measure, the bill I was introducing, would be and would remain a curse upon the country. And I was 26, going on 27 at that time, and that was very heavy. So I was kind of, I remember walking down the main street in Dublin. It's a very vivid memory, and being afraid that somebody was going to jump out and call me a witch from hell, call me something satanic, tell me I was the worst thing that ever happened in Ireland. And my husband, Nick, we had married at this stage, decided that he would burn the letters. Of course, we regret that now because we're archivists and it would have been nice to preserve them. But somehow that helped me and released, I kind of steadied. And we worked together, and after 9 years, we did get that law changed. It was a lesson to me that never afterwards, and I got quite a lot of criticism, needless to say, for other things that I wanted to do or steps or things that I said, but nothing ever affected me as deeply as that first criticism, which was very severe and actually in part destabilized me. And I like to kind of say this to young people, if you really believe in something, be prepared to pay a price. Be prepared to be unpopular if necessary, if you really believe in what you're doing. So then I went on to take cases in court, particularly on women's rights, and it was very easy because there were lots of women's rights to take cases on. And the great advantage at the time was that by 1973, Ireland had joined the European community as it was initially, the European Union as it became. And the European Union had much higher standards of gender equality than Ireland. And the trick from a legal point of view was to get the Irish court to refer a question to the European court and then go off to Luxembourg and argue the case. And I went off to Luxembourg and I never lost a case. Bang, bang, bang. You know, it was really, really good fun. And there was another court, the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, and that was a case on which I was asked by a friend of mine who'd been in college at the same time as me, who had come out in Ireland as being gay at a time when nobody was doing that. It was very courageous of him. And he decided to take a legal case, and we lost in the High Court, and then we lost by 3-2, narrowly lost in the Supreme Court. And then we took the case to the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, and once again, ultimately, won out in that court in Strasbourg. And I loved the practice of law. I saw myself for the rest of my life as a lawyer. And then in 1990, unexpectedly, I was invited by the Labour Party to accept their nomination to run for President of Ireland. Now, the Labour Party was the smallest party of the three main political parties. I had been a member of it for 9 of my 20 years as a senator. I had retired from the Irish Senate in August of 1969 after 20 years. Because my legal practice was very busy, and because I felt I was actually at that stage doing more significant work in the courts than I was necessarily doing, because we pushed out the boundaries in the Senate and there wasn't that much more that could be done from a legislative point of view on opening up Irish society. So I was surprised at the offer of the nomination, and initially I wasn't actually terribly keen. The Irish presidency is very different from the presidency of the United States or of France or of many African countries, etc. It's a non-executive presidency. It's elected by the people of Ireland, but the political role is with the Prime Minister and the majority in government, the party or parties who form the government. And the President must keep aligned with government policy, etc. But nonetheless, it is an important moral voice. And when I read the oath of office, I thought to myself, which is in our constitution, I thought, if you're elected directly by the people, you could do a lot more than those 6 men who were near retirement by the time they were either elected, or if there was if the election wasn't contested, they could become president even without the votes. They hadn't really stretched the office very much. They'd just done the job in a narrow sort of way. So I began my campaign advocating for a stronger president, and the Irish people liked it, and I could see I was becoming more popular. So then suddenly I went to win, if you like. And against the odds, I became president in 1990, took office in December 1990. And I remember in my inauguration address saying that I hoped, as President of Ireland, I would work at local level, I would work at national level, but I hoped also, even at international level, to be able in some way to work on human rights. I had absolutely no idea what I meant or what could possibly... but in fact, events did allow. For example, in 1992, there was terrible hunger in Somalia because there were militias fighting and stopping the food getting to the feeding stations. And the aid agencies in Ireland came to see me. And I had to kind of contrive by agreeing on live television that if the government would agree, I would definitely go to Somalia. And the government, found the Irish people wanted me to go to Somalia, so somehow I got to Somalia in 1992. And that made it easier in 1994, after the genocidal killing there, to go to Rwanda. And for 7 years, it was a great joy to be president. I worked at it extremely hard. I used a symbol. I've come to believe in symbols, which became really important, which was a light in the window. On the night of my election, I said I would put a light in the window of my official residence, which has an Irish name, Oris, meaning house, Oris on Uachtaráin, and I was the Uachtaráin, the president. And that light took on a life of its own, and it kind of helped to shape an Irish diaspora, many of whom live, of course, in this country, but also in Canada, in various parts of Europe, in Argentina in particular, in Australia, in New Zealand. And somehow this became an important way to bring that diaspora together. And after 7 years of being much more active than my predecessors had been, doing the things I was doing, I felt I've opened up the office now. I won't seek another 7 years. It's a bit long for a non-executive presidency. And I found that the High Commissioner for Human Rights of a new office, the first High Commissioner, had suddenly resigned. So I asked the Irish government to put me forward. And Kofi Annan appointed me High Commissioner, and that was in September 1997. I went from a very supported, very popular presidency into a small office in the back of the Palais des Nations, where we were so underfunded that people never left anything on their desk, or one of their colleagues would probably pinch it because they were short of paper or short of whatever. We had just got computers, heavy computers, and it was difficult. And I started to work harder and harder. I started taking sleeping pills because I wasn't sleeping well. And by December, it had pretty well broken me. I went back to Ireland, and my oldest brother, who, like my parents, had become a doctor, a medical doctor, had come back from New Zealand. And he said to me, "Mary, you're in danger of having a nervous breakdown." And I was kind of cross to hear my brother say that. And I said, "Oh, no, I'm not." And I threw away the sleeping pills, and I kind of decided that I wanted to take another fortnight to rest, etc. And I steadied myself. And from then on, we built up the office over the 4 years. I did travel. I made 6 working visits to China. I went to all the places where human rights were being violated, like Bogota in Colombia at the time, or the DRC, Goma, or Chechnya. When Grozny was being bombed. And I came back to the office energized because people there were determined to fight for their human rights. And they were ordinary people, if I can put it that way. Yes, they were journalists and they were lawyers and that, but they were also housewives and just people determined to fight for their rights because they were being deprived of them. And that really stays with me. When you don't have your rights, that's when you particularly appreciate them. And then afterwards, I came to New York and began, after my 5 years, well, first of all, I should say it was a 4-year term, and I decided not to seek a second term because we were based in Geneva. For family reasons, apart from anything else, my husband was keen to get back to Dublin, and I said, I've built up the office, it's strong now, it's doing its job, I won't seek a second term. And the human rights community begged me, literally, no, please stay on, we need a good High Commissioner, you've learned how to do the job, please stay on. And so I stayed on for another year. Do you know when that year began? On 9/11, literally. Wasn't I lucky? So I was then the voice of the UN, especially criticizing the United States for failing to comply with the international obligations that the United States had committed to, the Convention on Torture, the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It was a lonely voice, it was a difficult voice, and actually it was also difficult that I said to Kofi Annan, who was still my boss at the time, that I was willing to actually stay on for the full term if he liked. And he knew that the United States would not support me, so in fact I only did the extra year. And I came to New York to establish a small organization called Realizing Rights to work in African countries. And that was when I came to climate. And I often admit that I actually came very late to understanding the importance of climate change, and I hadn't made any link with my work as High Commissioner for Human Rights. So I feel quite humble about that, given that my portfolio as High Commissioner was human rights, gender equality, the rights of indigenous peoples, the rights of people with disabilities. And yet I didn't make the connection because I was so busy doing the huge job of trying to implement and hold people to their account and do that job. But what I found, starting in 2003, 2004, 2005 in African countries, was that they were already deeply affected by the climate shocks, deeply affected. Women would say to me, "Is God punishing us? What is happening? This is outside our experience." Farmers would say, "We're devastated. Our whole, either it's rain or it's severe drought or the rainy seasons don't come at the right time." And I realized the injustice of climate change. So I didn't talk about climate change, I talked about climate justice. And I'll just briefly talk about the 5 layers of injustice that I discerned. The first was the obvious, that it affects the poorest countries, the poorest communities, small island states and indigenous peoples much earlier than developed countries, and much more severely, although they're not responsible. Secondly, the gender dimension within that. Women are not at the deciding table, often don't have land rights, don't get credit, don't get training, and yet they're the ones making their communities resilient on the ground, and they don't get the climate finance. So that was an injustice. The intergenerational injustice, the fact that young climate activists, Greta Thunberg and all of these, the Fridays for Future, they're not at the table either because they're young, and yet they know decisions have to be taken more urgently, and they're not being taken. That injustice. But there's an injustice of a developmental sort as well. Different regions of the world have had different pathways to development. So the United States, Europe, Korea, Japan, we've built our economies on fossil fuel. Our task is to wean ourselves off more rapidly and with just transition. But developing countries are finding oil and gas and have found coal for quite some time, and now we're saying to them, but we've used up the carbon budget, so you can't use it. So that's also an injustice in the sense that we're not providing the investment in clean energy into those countries. We haven't been at a sufficient level. Very little of the investment has gone into African countries, for example. So that's an injustice. And then the final injustice is, of course, the injustice to nature herself, the loss of species, what we're doing to nature. And I was very honoured in 2007 when I was invited to become one of the elders brought together by Nelson Mandela. He told us that we should be independent and that we should bring hope where there is despair, courage where there is fear, speak truth to power, and at the same time be humble. And, he said, when you go to a place, people there know far more about it than you will, so listen. The importance of listening and empathy. And it was such a privilege. Archbishop Tutu was our first chair, and I learned so much from him. I loved him very much. Our second chair was my former boss, Kofi Annan. Of course, Jimmy Carter was an elder at that time. And we travelled to various countries. We did what we could in for example, the Middle East, which Jimmy Carter was particularly committed to. I led a visit to Gaza that he couldn't come on because of his security wouldn't allow him to come on it. Even more recently, the elders have visited the Middle East. We've also visited places like North Korea. We've visited various countries that have problems. And we also have engaged in quiet diplomacy over the years. And we have a kind of broad strategy of the issues that we focus on, and we call them existential threats, which they are. The climate and nature crisis, for example, the pandemic crisis, conflicts, and more recently, and that would probably be of interest to some of you, we have decided that we need to focus also on artificial intelligence as potentially, obviously, a great tool for good, but also one that can exacerbate all the risks. And quite recently, a number of us as elders were outside London, literally less than a fortnight ago, with a number of AI experts, and we have issued our initial statement on AI together, the elders and the AI experts, looking at it really from the point of view of peace and security, human rights, and sustainable development. Is there any significance in that? Okay. Anyway, so that has been a way of continuing with a collective moral voice, promoting the kind of justice, including climate and nature, climate justice, which I've been very keen on. And then I have another hat that I share with Omar Yagi. We're both guardians of the planetary boundaries, which is the work of Johann Rockström and his institute in Germany, which has looked at the 9 broad ecosystems that sustain life. And this is a much more holistic and fuller way, and more a way that brings in nature much more, because it includes the oceans and fresh water and all the rest of it. We're in breach of 7 of those 9 planetary boundaries. But in fact, there's a good news story. We retrieved one of them, the ozone layer. I think many of you in this audience will recall in the 80s how we thought we were going to fry because the ozone layer was opening up. And we learned it was these chemicals. And we quickly got the Montreal Protocol and successor to that protocol and dealt with that. And that particular boundary is now one of the good safe boundaries, one of the 2 safe boundaries. The most recent one was the oceans, which threatens the coral reefs globally, which are really very much at risk. Well, the guardians of the planetary boundaries, we focus on a planetary health check once a year, looking at the implications of the fact that we're in breach of 7 of these planetary boundaries and that they interact with each other, and that there are tipping points which are coming closer. And it reminds me very much because during my time post High Commissioner, I've also had other UN mandates. I had a mandate in 2013 to 2014 for the Great Lakes in Africa. But in 2014, the then Secretary General Ban Ki-moon switched me to climate before the Paris Agreement. And I was very deeply involved in the discussions leading up to the Paris Agreement. And, you know, I was reminding students this morning that I met that I remember very vividly, this was 2015, of course, that we didn't know whether we would get the goal of Paris. In fact, it didn't look as if we would get the goal of including reference to 1.5 degrees in the goal. It was the work of the indigenous communities, civil society, the small island states, the moral voice, and within the ministers, and I was involved in the extra ministerial meetings that the French presidency organised. It was so necessary to have the voice of Tony de Brum saying, do you no longer want us to be a sovereign people? Meaning the Marshall Islands would go under with high sea level rise. And anyway, the high level ambition, we got the goal of staying well below 2 degrees and working for 1.5 degrees. And it's that sense of the collective way in which that was achieved, with the, you know, the marching in the street, 1.5 to stay alive, the voice, the moral voice of the small island states, and then somehow gathering in the other countries into a high ambition coalition. That has encouraged me to believe that we can move things with leadership. So the leadership I want to end on is explaining this symbol that I wear, the dandelion, Project Dandelion, and I will explain it briefly because I'm running out of time. Project Dandelion is a women-led, but not women only, movement on climate justice, which follows nature, a weed. The dandelion is a weed according to humans, but actually, if you look at it in nature, it's a beautiful flower. It grows on all continents. It's very resilient, which is a climate word. You can't get rid of the damn thing if you want to, off your lawn. It has deep roots that regenerate the soil, and you can eat or drink every part of the dandelion, so there's no waste. And then how do you spread it? You blow. And very often when children blow, they wish. So it's nature. And I believe, and this is something I believe very strongly and increasingly, we will not resolve the climate and nature crisis until we realize we are part of nature. Until we realize we are deeply part of nature and have to be. I think that's very much what I believe. So I'm sometimes asked, Project Dandelion has succeeded in bringing the women-led groups together, and we're working very hard on getting climate finance to women at grassroots. That's one of our objectives. The smallholder farmers, the indigenous women who save the forests, etc., trying to move the climate finance. But I am asked from time to time, well, you seem to be working very hard. When are you going to retire? And I actually have an answer to that from my father, who was a medical doctor. He had a great saying, which is a bit west of Ireland, and I like it. It is better to wear out than to rust out. And I intend to wear out. And I'm going to end with another saying by a former boss of mine, Kofi Annan, that he used a lot, because I think it sums up a lot of what I'm trying to say. You are never too young to lead, and you are never too old to learn. So thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Mary, that was absolutely inspiring. Okay, so now we are going to be joined on the stage. I guess this is all the light we can get. Yes? We're going to be joined on the stage by two more panelists. First, Professor Omar Yaghi, chaired professor of chemistry at Berkeley and a pioneer in materials chemistry. He was awarded the 2025 Nobel Prize in Chemistry and is best known for founding the field of reticular chemistry. Omar is also the recipient of the Tang Prize, an honor he shares with Mary. We're also honored to be joined by Erwin Chemerinsky, Dean of the Berkeley School of Law, and the Jesse Chopper Distinguished Professor of Law. He became the 13th Dean of Berkeley Law in 2017, following his role as the founding Dean of UC Irvine School of Law. He is regarded as one of the nation's leading constitutional scholars, and I will add moral voices, even though that isn't here, but I would say one of the leading moral voices. With that, I am going to begin with a few opening questions, and then you have on the backs of your seats a QR code. I guess those of you in the front row don't have it, but the rest of you, or you could reach behind your seat. And if you would like to pose a question, they're being gathered through that platform and consolidated. And so hopefully we'll get to a few of those as well. So first, President Robinson, in earlier reflections on Ireland's transformation, you referenced the idea of Ireland as soft wax, capable of being reshaped, at least by hands as strong as yours. And in your journey to planetary guardianship, what is the most stubborn, hardened wax in our global institutions that we must find a way to melt before we break?
It's an interesting way of looking at the problem, and I actually think the problem is leadership. We need to somehow mold that. as elders, we promote long view leadership. Long view leadership that is based on science and evidence, but also empathy, that different people are affected in different ways. That takes into account not just current generations, but also future generations. It's actually the wisdom of indigenous peoples. They always remember their ancestors and 7 degrees of future generations. And I think there's such wisdom in that. At the moment, we have autocratic, populist, short-term leadership in our world, and it's almost getting worse with some bad example, which I won't go into.
Okay, now I turn to Jean Chemerinsky. How should the courts think about a potential right to a safe and healthy environment? Are there benchmarks that can help inform how such a right might be recognized within the broader framework of human and legal rights?
Let me just say how honored I am to be part of this panel and this discussion. 150 countries in the world recognize a right to safe and clean environment. 84 of those countries have it in their constitutions. The United Nations in 2022 recognized such a right, but there is no such right under the United States Constitution or in American law. And it's worth taking a moment to explain why. The United States Constitution, unlike that throughout the rest of the world, is focused very much on what are called negative liberties, prohibitions on what the government can do. It's not thought of creating affirmative rights. So many countries in the world create a right to food, shelter, medical care, education, but not the United States Constitution. It's about prohibiting what the government can do. The government can't infringe freedom of speech. The government can't abridge free exercise of religion. So likewise, there's no right to safe and clean environment under the United States Constitution. I would hope someday the United States Supreme Court would recognize that there should be affirmative liberties under the Constitution, that there should be a right to food, shelter, medical care, education, the safe and clean environment. It's not going to happen with this Supreme Court. But the Constitution isn't the only source of law. Congress, by statute, can create rights, even when they're not in the Constitution. And unfortunately, that hasn't happened with regard to a safe and clean environment. And I think that's because of something that is very hard for me to explain, why the environment has become a politically divisive issue. It wasn't always this way. Richard Nixon, a Republican president, was the one who created the Environmental Protection Agency, the Council of Environmental Quality. In the early 1970s, environmental safety was a nonpartisan, or at least a bipartisan issue. But today, astoundingly, people on the right deny the very existence of climate change, despite overwhelming evidence. And thus it seems unlikely with this president and this Congress that we're going to be dealing with the problem of climate change. We're going backwards into climate change. But I'm hopeful there will be a point at which Congress and a president will recognize such a right, will move towards dealing with problems of climate change, and maybe even, as I said, someday it'll include the Supreme Court interpreting the Constitution that way.
Mm-hmm.
President Robinson, would you like to comment on the contrast between American and other law?
Well, actually, I was just going to add to what you said, that this recent advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice also recognized a right to a healthy environment. And just, for your interest, our Irish Supreme Court almost recognized it in a recent climate case, because it's possible in our Irish Constitution, we have, including, we have rights, but we also have something, the possible unenumerated rights that can be identified by the court, and it has been done. And the Supreme Court said it's possible under the Irish Constitution there is a right to a safe and healthy environment, but I don't have to understand that. And actually, now with the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, I have no doubt, and there's also a similar court case. The Swiss grannies, God bless them, Swiss grannies took a great case before the European Court of Human Rights, and the European Court of Human Rights gave a great judgment and recognized the right to a healthy environment. So I think the next time, and there is a case brewing, that a case comes before the Irish Supreme Court, it will officially recognise the thing. But I just wanted, if I may, to say, because it's such a story, how did this advisory opinion come about of the International Court of Justice? I just love that story. Law students in Vanuatu, Vanuatu is the smallest Pacific island, were in class and asked the question, well, look, we feel this climate, it's an existential threat. Is it possible to get the International Court of Justice? And they said, well, it can give an advisory opinion, but it needs a resolution of the General Assembly. Oh, right, we'll work on that. And the law students started in the Pacific Islands, got the youth galvanized internationally, young climate activists. Vanuatu put it before the General Assembly. The General Assembly unanimously endorsed it. The International Court of Justice gave a brilliant judgment, advisory opinion, and they're now bringing it back to the thing. So, I'm saying in particular to young people, that's a good example of you're never too young to lead, Anyway.
Okay, now to you, Professor Yage. Your work on metal organic frameworks, MOFs, and more recently, covalent organic frameworks, COFs, can enable us to pull water from desert air and capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Does this technology change the human right to water from political negotiations over pipes, rivers, and water sources into an individual water harvesting right for the atmosphere?
Thank you for that interesting question, and it's an honor to listen to you, to this wonderful presentation. I do the easy stuff. You guys keep going and all that's hard. It's easy to solve technical problems.
Omar, is your mic on?
I have a mic.
Oh my. Okay. Yeah. So.
I was going to say that it's easy to solve technical problems facing society.
Not so easy.
Well, it takes time, but relatively easy compared to the problems that you face. And so what I wanted to say is that if you look at the history of human civilizations, whenever we decided that we have a crisis, we went on to fix that crisis when it involved a technical advance. And so in my lab, we have invented these MOFs and COFs, which are highly porous materials that are customizable for different applications. And some of them happen to be extremely useful for taking water out of air, especially arid air, and making drinking water or water that could be used for agriculture. And not only do they work in arid areas of the world, but they would also work in humidified areas of the world where there may be plenty of water, but it's not clean. And so I think that when these are deployed and in the fullness of time, that we would give water independence to everybody that is on our planet, because they are off-grid. Some of them work with electricity, but the interesting ones to me are the ones that are working just on ambient sunlight and to generate water. Just to give you an example, a device as large as that podium would give you about 500, depending on the conditions, 500 to 700 liters a day, every day for 7 years or so.
It's a renewable source.
It's a renewable source, and although you're extracting water out of the air, but also water is going back into the air to join the natural water cycle. So you're replenishing the water as you are using it. And it's clean. It's an ultra clean water that to drink it, you can mineralize it, or it could be used for various, let's say, household uses or agriculture. And it could be deployed anywhere in the world.
So, this is a question for all of you. It's something that we at Berkeley and at universities around the world are thinking deeply about. Political, technological, and planetary changes are occurring at unprecedented speed. As universities prepare future leaders for this rapidly changing and often unstable world, what disciplines, skills, or modes of thinking should be integrated more intentionally into our education than we are doing today? So it's open for different perspectives. President Robinson.
Okay, maybe I'll start with what is a feminist perspective. We need more intersectionality, yes, more connection between these different issues, whether it's in a university, getting to know in a university better what others are doing and linking it with what you're doing. I mean, do people in the university know enough about what you're doing, Omar, and the potential, etc.? I must say, I learned about intersectionality when I was, it was the first time I really heard, it's a kind of clumsy word, but it's a wonderful concept, that we have to see the connections between, water, health, economics, all of these things, they are interconnected. And the more, as you said, we have far too rapid attention to them. I first learned about it actually when I had the tough job of being Secretary General of the World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa, because we brought intersectionality into the Durban conference to tackle the racism. And it was actually really good for me to fully understand and to immerse myself in that. And ever since, I believed that that is one of the real contributions of women's leadership and of the ways of tackling all of the issues, including the issue of racism.
It's interesting. I'm going to put in one little comment here. Our college, the College of Computing, Data Science, and Society, was founded in 2023, the first new college at Berkeley since the 60s. And it is very intentionally in its structure a more intersectional college than ones that were founded in earlier times. And I think that's because Berkeley is deeply aware, more than any place else in the world, about the power of these intersections. And so wherever computing and data science happen to be an intersection of other disciplines, be they chemistry or economics or law or, we have attempted to have a structure and an education that enables that. And, I think it's really a credit to the Berkeley faculty that Berkeley evolves in its institutional structures as well as its educational programs. I love the word intersectional, but I think it is deeply awkward, but whenever it comes up, I resonate with whomever is speaking. And I had never thought of CDSS as intersectional, but when you say it, yes. And Berkeley is a place of intersectionality. So, Erwin.
I certainly agree with that, though I'll answer the question slightly differently. I think we need to educate people to be part of democracy. I believe our democracy is in real danger. No democracy lasts forever. We're all familiar with countries that once were democracies but are no longer. It would just be hubris to believe that this country can resist forever the pressures that have caused other democracies to fail. And I think part of the problem in this country is we do such a poor job with regard to civics education. Recent polls showed a quarter of the people in this country couldn't name the 3 branches of the federal government. 50% of the people in this country can't describe how a law gets adopted in Washington, D.C. More people can name some of the 7 dwarfs who can name justices on the United States Supreme Court. I don't believe a democracy can survive if people are ignorant about their government. And so I think we need to think as a university, all universities need to think more about how do we educate our students to be active participants in this democracy, in democracies across the world, and then how to use them for positive social change.
And now let's get the scientist's perspective on this.
Well, I'm going to say something a little controversial. I think that our universities are not structured in a way that enhances intersectionality. I think that the magic that I see at Berkeley is that our students have liberated their minds to go from the chemistry department to the mechanical engineering department to the computer science department to the CDSS center to make their project work, or to take their project from the molecule and the material that they're comfortable making and going into zones where most people feel uncomfortable because they have to go to a different discipline, different speciality that they have to learn. And I see this in my lab day after day after day. Not only do my students do what we do best, which is molecules to materials, but also they do the chemical engineering of configuring that material in a device, the mechanical engineering that tells you whether that device is going to be energy efficient, it's going to be set up efficiently for mass transport and heat transport, and all of the things that you need to do to make that device viable in society. So they're going from the molecule to society. But that's despite of the fact that the structure of the university, not just Berkeley, but the American university or the global university, is that there are a lot of divisions because we have to teach certain things. But I think the researchers, the students, are the ones that are breaking these barriers and with amazing results. I never dreamt that I would have a lab where the students are going from molecule all the way to a device that would be deployed in society. And that's what they're doing at Berkeley. When I was a student, I was taught to be a scholar. And what that meant is that you push the frontiers of science in a corner somewhere doing your research. And when it came to doing something outside your specialty, that was not your department. You went, that was handed over to somebody else. So, but this is, it's,
broken the rules.
Yeah, we did. And I believe that AI is helping this, helping us talk to each other, helping me talk to the economist, talk to the government, talk to the lawyer, talk to other people that would have impact on my inventions being deployed in society, the economics of it, the impact on society, the impact on government policy. And AI is helping us do that. And we have a new department that is under consideration to allow us to do just what I just described.
So before I turn to the audience questions, yesterday evening at dinner, Mary, in response to one of the questions at dinner, you related an anecdote about Archbishop Tutu, which has resonated with me since the moment you said it, and I wonder if you could share it with this audience.
Well, I have shared it quite a lot publicly because it also resonated with me at the time. It was quite a few years ago now, probably about 16 or 17 years ago. I was with Archbishop Tutu in New York. We were both there as elders. He was the chair, and I was an ordinary elder. And the audience was young people. It was a social good conference of the UN Foundation. And when Archbishop Tutu was in front of young people, he would tell them how much he loved them and believed in them, and he'd wave his arms and get very excited. And we were being moderated by this journalist. And she said very sharply, "Archbishop Tutu, why are you such an optimist?" And he looked at her and he shook his head and he said, "Oh no, I'm not an optimist. I'm a prisoner of hope." And I remember being very deeply affected because I knew what he meant. You know, the glass may not be half full, there may only be a tiny bit in it, but you know, you work with that, you grow it, you collaborate. It's what you can do, and you must do it. And it's, you know, and actually, the more active you are in doing, the less you are full of the anxieties of worrying about these problems. You're actually making a contribution. And like this, you know, like many other things, Arch had such wisdom. And can I tell another wisdom of Archbishop Tutu? He taught me to use humor. I, you know, would be very funny at home, but actually, especially when I was president, I didn't use humor so much. I kind of, it was such an honor to be president. I was so busy doing it to the best of my ability that I didn't use humor so much. I notice young women, when they are getting somewhere, work harder. They're funny at home, but when they're at workplace, they're working so hard, they're serious about themselves, and they work hard. And the young man comes in, and he's funny, and he jokes with his friends, and often he gets the promotion. He's made the relationships. And the woman is... So I say very often, especially to young women, use humor more, the wisdom of that. And then I imitate Arch now. If you see clips of me, quite often when I'm invited to... I didn't do it when I came up on the stage this time, but quite often what I do is I do a silly dance, and people laugh. And when people laugh, they're with you. They're open to you. So just another wisdom of Archbishop Tutu.
So this actually brings me to a question from the audience. President Robinson, can you speak about your experience of mentorship and how the integration of nature came into your life? So I think those are different, but yes, mentorship I think is very interesting for many of the people, men and women, in this audience.
Well, in many ways, I was personally mentored, in particular by becoming part of the elders. Nelson Mandela himself, he was just the most extraordinary man I have ever met. And he had the capacity to forgive after 27 years in prison. And, and he spoke with such, and then, I mentioned Archbishop Tutu, Kofi Annan, just that constant. So I try now, and in fact, the elders do a lot of intergenerational conversation. It's not exactly mentoring, but we have actually, we had an existential threats conference during the UN General Assembly 2 years ago with younger leaders to mentor. And I think we are more aware that we have to share some of the experience. It's not that we're terribly, terribly wise, but we have had various types of experience and we should share more. But the fun in doing it in the intergenerational conversation with, for example, young climate activists, is we learn as much as we contribute, because the perspective is different, and they're so involved and they use social media so effectively, which we generally don't. There's a lot of mutual learning in the mentorship as well.
So I'm not sure. This might be the last question. We might have one more. And this is something that we touched on in our conversation, but we have the question: how can we improve climate justice in areas with higher political tensions? And we have many areas of higher political tension these days. So do any of you have any thoughts about that? Dean Chemerinsky.
First, we have to articulate the values and explain them. Second, we need to constantly go back to the scientific evidence with regard to climate. And third, we need to work for change in every way we can. At this moment, it's not going to happen through the White House or this Congress, but states can do more with regard to pursuing climate justice. Even local governments can do more, so we have to pursue it there. And then we have to use the political process, hopefully, to create an administration and a Congress that will do that. And you rightly point to what's happened internationally. Unfortunately, the United States doesn't follow that international law, but it should, it can, and hopefully it will in the future.
And if I can just add, I think we need more and more, and it's a little bit what you're saying about democracy, we need to start with local communities and build up and know that under international human rights law, we have duties to the community in which alone we reach the free and full expression of our personality. I mean, that's in the Universal Declaration, and I think it's a really important principle now to instill local democratic thinking and build up. I find that I've been to a lot of conferences on climate, and the delegates who come, the ministers who come, very often their countries don't even know they're there and don't know what they're doing there. So they don't have any pressure to make the right decisions. You know, I mean, and it's often presidents of small island states who come. Their people know why they're there, and they are desperate for their, you know, to get the right decisions. But actually, there's a disconnect between those who represent internationally at some of these meetings and those that they're technically representing, because they haven't talked about it, they haven't brought. So it's not a case of just governments alone. I think we have to, and it's again to your building more of a democratic engagement from bottom up and strengthening that, and I think that's needed as well.
I'm going to end with one question to Omar Yagi about how you see a way of uniting education more globally. And, you know, we're talking about communities here, and are there ways in which we should be educating communities beyond the normal university structure?
I mean, education is necessary for change, and in the research-strong countries, we extract talent from the world.
Yes.
But there's a lot more talent that has no positions, let's say, available. So we have a lot of demand and very little supply. So this centralized model is serving the world okay, but not as well as it could be. And so my thinking is that why don't we flip it around and go where the talent is? So I could have a group, let's say, in Berkeley doing research, but I could also have an institute in Vietnam or Malaysia or Indonesia or any other place around the world. So we need to start thinking in terms of distributive science, distributive way of doing research. That way, when someone leaves their country, they don't leave vacuum behind, but rather there's an institute there that continues to grow and things growing around it, and you're building an ecosystem of science where now you have many scientists solving the many problems facing the world rather than few scientists in few countries solving the many problems facing the world.
That was the problem in COVID, during COVID, that African countries did not have access to vaccines. They didn't have any technology of that. And that is stopping the current agreement on an annex to the, we got a pandemic treaty last year agreed, but the annex is the important part of it. And African countries are resenting the holding on to intellectual property that doesn't allow for, you know, there's a real debate going on at the moment, precisely. And I think, I very much agree with you. I think we do need to promote far more actual science in developing countries, in countries around the world, much more, you know, and as you say, go to where the talent is, keep the talent in those countries, and, you know, have it as a fairer system globally. But, you know, COVID showed that the rich world just grabbed quickly what they could, and it was very ugly for a while. And I think we need to look back and think about that.
Erwin, maybe a final perspective from you on some aspect of the conversation that we have been having.
I want to go back to then what President Robinson said, quoting the Archbishop, in terms of hope, because I think this is a moment where it's hard to be hopeful, and yet we have to be hopeful. And for me, the answer really comes by looking at the sweep of history. That when you look at this country, we still have an enormous way to go with regard to racial progress, but we're a lot further than we were in 1787, where I was born in 1953, when all of the southern states still had laws that were segregated. We have a long way to go with regard to gender equality, but I look at our law school that's now 2/3 women students. I think about it in terms of sexual orientation. Is just in 2015, not even 11 years ago, that finally the Supreme Court recognized a right for equal treatment and equal dignity for same-sex couples and the ability to marry. So I really believe that the late Dr. King got it right
when he said that the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. And when I'm asked what gives me hope for the future, I always answer without hesitation, my students.
So let us see. I am now going to invite to this stage, perhaps here with us, sitting here, our phenomenal Chancellor, Rich Lyons, to deliver some final remarks.
Well, just a few very quick thoughts. What a talk and an inspiration for all of us. President Robinson, we're so appreciative to have you here. If I could offer just a few quick thoughts about this college, this newest college since the 1960s, right, of computing, data science, and society. It was by design to create something much more horizontal. We don't need another vertical. Higher education doesn't need yet another vertical. How do we pull together fields like computing and data science and statistics and others and connect them to other parts of the university? So it was by its nature, and Jennifer mentioned that it's by design a different sort of college. Its origins really came from student and faculty demand. This connects to something that Omar mentioned, right? It's sort of like the students want to connect this university, and we have our academic disciplines, and those are important to us as well. But finding a way to pull this university together and make it add up to even more than the sum of the parts, as magnificent as it already is a really important part of what Berkeley's doing and what higher ed is doing more generally. And then how do we look, Berkeley is one of society's most valuable assets, full stop. And Berkeley is known the world around because of the fundamental research that it does. Our education is top-notch, our public service, et cetera. But the fundamental research defines this place. But if we started to think a little bit about the core of the mission, the deep why, start with why. It's like, how do we create more societal benefit through excellent research, teaching, and public service? Then part of it is, pardon the jargon, it's like that full stack, right? How do we do the most fundamental of research? And then play a role in getting it into society. It can play a role in making sure that we're creating societal benefit. And some of that role, the sort of downstream part of it, is our students, it's our postdocs, it's our graduate students, it's lots of things, it's our alumni. But that's really important. So let me shift now and just thank President Mary Robinson for not just your inspiring comments and insights today, but also your remarkable impact on the world. You are an exemplar. You really are a role model for so many young people, and we've been hearing that for decades. And also my colleagues, Erwin and Omar and Jennifer, wow, you bring so much to every talk and every conversation. I just love listening to you. It's part of why we get so much out of this place. A lifelong love affair with ideas and learning is a big part of why all of us are here. And then I want to thank also my friend and fellow alum, Alan Spivak, who made this whole session possible, this whole lecture series. Thank you, Alan, for that. And I'll close with this and get off the stage. It is, there are at least three things that great education does and great research institution. There is the thinking part. It's of course true that we don't teach people what to think. We teach them how to think. Yeah, but we need more than thinking. The second category is doing. We need them to act upon the world. We need them to leave here with a sense of agency, like I can do this, right? So if somebody said, what would you like to see more of? It's like, I hope we can collectively deliver an even greater sense of agency, of course, with that stronger thinking. But the third piece is the being part, the thinking, the doing, and the being. Sort of like, you can't be what you can't see. That's sort of about identity shaping. How do we affect the cognitive shift in our people, whether students or faculty and staff, from they do that to I do that? And I'll close with this. Victoria Coleman, one of our colleagues, she said the other day this phrase, and what she meant by it was something very specific. Take it personally. And she did not mean what you just said to me offends me. Sort of like, I see a place where I can make a contribution. I'm going to take it upon myself to get after that. let's take it personally. Thank you, President.